Hey everyone, more exercise isn't always the answer. Are you overstimulating your dog? This is what we're going to be getting into today on From Wolf to Well. Let's get into it. So, some of the things that I hear, my dog is crazy, so I need to really exercise them. I need to take them out more. I need to keep them busy. Sometimes the problem isn't lack of exercise. Sometimes the dog is overstimulated, over entertained, over managed, and never taught how to come back down. Another topic that coincides with the last few topics I've been discussing, and it's about getting people to understand that there's more to it than just let's keep exercising my dog, so to speak. You can't always out exercise a dog who has never learned how to settle. We go back to teaching our dog how to do nothing, teaching our dog to settle. This is very important. Last episode, I talked about calm being a skill. Today, I want to take that one step further and talk about something I see all the time: owners accidentally overstimulating their dogs while trying to help them. I think part of that too is because we feel guilty. Again, there's always this guilt trip of we're not doing enough. And I will be the first one to say that a lot of the times I say, hey, tired dog is a happy master, or a tired dog is a good dog. Those sayings are there for a reason, don't get me wrong. But I don't think the answer is always longer walks, more daycare, let's continue to play fetch for hours, more toys, more training, even more enrichment, more stimulation. More is not always better. The other thing too, when it comes to kind of going to this level of almost creating an athlete, and once you've kind of created that athlete where they're always outside, they're always being stimulated, they're always doing something, they end up not really having an off switch. And this just makes the behavior worse over time. Not the behavior itself, but I mean the behaviors that we're seeing just end up escalating, or it's like we almost always have to upgrade. It's kind of like, think about it like feeding your dog, sprinkling some meal topper to get them to eat the meal, and then like a week later they hold off, and then you're putting chicken in there, and then a week later they hold off, and then you're putting like caviar in there, and you just consistently upgrade, right, the food, and now they don't want the kibble at all, right? So it's kind of a little bit of the same thing with what we're talking about in the context of creating that athlete with no off switch. A dog gets physically fit, but emotionally they still can't regulate. One of the most important ways that we work on regulating is by really getting our dog to teach them that skill to do nothing, right? To settle. That is something that needs to be ingrained into us when we have dogs that, whether they're companion dogs, dogs who are very strong working dogs, it doesn't really matter. We should be, especially in domestication, the fact that all of us have all different types of lives. Some of us are working every day. Some of us are working from home, working from the office. So there's so many different outlets that we can kind of create for our dogs. And we have to figure out which ones work better and so on. But nonetheless, the one thing that's kind of always should be in the back of your mind is that we need to get our dogs to be able to settle. We need them to be able to function without being occupied, learning to do nothing, which again coincides with everything we've been talking about in the past few weeks. So again, dogs get physically fit, but emotionally they still cannot regulate, especially if you're always giving them something to do, keeping them busy all the time. Believe it or not, I don't get this comment often, but when I do, it's almost always the same situation. Every once in a while, I'll have a comment like, I can't get my dog to turn off. Now, I get that question a lot, but what it's usually not paired with is that when I meet the client and I see what they're doing so much with the dog. It's unbelievable how much they're doing. Mentally, you would think there's no way that they are the problem. Because everyone always goes to, oh, well, you're not doing enough with your dog. If your dog is acting like this, obviously you're the problem. You need to be doing more. or, you haven't found the right outlet, or whatever excuse or comment we say. But when it's usually paired with someone who's really doing everything, from everything I see, it's all happening. And then I still get that comment like, oh, my dog can't do nothing, or this or that, I usually notice that that person can't do nothing. That's number one. So I notice that they're kind of a little bit all over the place. They can't settle. And so hence they assume, or, I guess maybe even subconsciously, they just always get the dog to do something just like they do. What's even more interesting about this situation is that typically when I look at what's happening, they're almost like answering their own question. They're saying like, okay, how do I get my dog to be calm and just do nothing? Every time he's in the crate, I'll give him something to chew on, or I'll do this and I'll do that. And he can't settle. Like, what on earth am I supposed to do? And I'm like, well, you just said it right there, right? If you have him in the crate, you don't always have to give him a toy. You could just, especially if he's been stimulated and he's been doing things, go ahead and just put him in the crate and do nothing. Oh, but he'll whine, he'll cry. Yeah, because this is a skill. I think I might have even mentioned this in my last podcast. Think of when you were young, maybe even not that long ago, not when you were like a toddler, but think about when you were young and impatient with whatever it might be. I don't know. Standing, I'll give you one actually for me that I did recently that gave me a bit of a flashback and made me realize that was fast compared to what it was before. Believe it or not, church. So I went to church with my son, and what I found, what was interesting is that I haven't been in a church in a very long time. So back in the day when I was going to church, my goodness, it was like the longest, like I thought we were there for an eternity, right? I was always getting into trouble. My parents were, grabbing me, bringing me out of the church, yelling at me, and I would come in a changed child, for a few hours at least. Which, even there, I said a few hours. We're there for an hour, right? But it seems so long. Versus I went with my son. My son wanted me to go with him, and I felt like it was 5 minutes, like we were done, right? And I mean, that is a form of patience in a way where we understand time better. And so that is a skill. It is a skill about learning, about maturity. All of those things are connected together. So it's normal that if it's not practiced, they are going to whine and cry about it. It's about continuing down that path, not ignoring their emotions, so to speak. That's not what I'm saying. My gosh, it's like anything else. If I'm in church and my child whines because they don't want to be there, if I leave church every time this happens, well, then the child is going to associate that like, okay, I can get out of things whenever I want. To me, at least, that's not okay. I understand that for some, maybe that's okay. I'm not telling you how to raise your kids. But just to say that when it comes to dogs, it really is very close to the same thing. We need to make sure that we are working on those patience. We are trying to work on that calm. Okay? They can run for an hour and still come home frantic, and then we're giving them something to stimulate them. But you have to understand that sometimes it's the overstimulation that causes this. This is also very much more popular now than it ever was before. Before, I could almost always say it was understimulation. Now, I feel like we are doing much, much more with our dogs, which is fantastic, right? But now we're going on the other spectrum. Now the dogs are always overstimulated. I guess in some cases, I could probably relate that to children as well. What we used to do when we were kids back then versus what the kids do nowadays in the sense of entertainment and so on, which does either regulate or unregulate their minds and so on. Also, let's talk about enrichment for a second. I want you to know, before I say this, I am an enrichment, a pro user, okay? I love enrichment tools. Lick mats, snuffle mats, puzzle toys, bones, a training game, fetch, daycare. It can be a form of enrichment. All these things, I am pro for all of this, okay? All great tools. But if the dog never practices nothing, they never learn nothing, okay? So this is why people will get into these traps where it's like, we do this on Monday, we do this on Tuesday, we do this on Wednesday, my dog goes to the daycare, my dog does that, and so you see the dog never turns off, okay? And you might be saying, well, the dog turns off at night when I go to bed. If you're telling me that, then clearly there shouldn't be any stimulation issues with your dog. That's a whole different story, right? I mean, I'm talking about dogs who are clearly overstimulated. And when I say clearly, what I mean is that if you have a problem, whatever that problem might be, your dog is overexcited, jumping, nipping, biting, all of these things, it can be overstimulation. Especially if you notice that, okay, like I'm crossing my T's, I'm dotting my I's, these things are still like difficult. Like, what's going on? Are we doing too much? Has our dog learned to do nothing? These things are extremely important. Since we're on that topic, let's talk about overstimulation signs. What are some of the signs? How do I know? This is so confusing. Is my dog understimulated or are they overstimulated? Zoomies. And they're not just like fun zoomies anymore. So zoomies, or I call it the witching hour. It's when the dog just kind of goes nuts. All right, runs. This can be a form of overstimulation. And everyone always aims and says, oh yeah, this dog is very understimulated. That's not always the case. You have to look at the whole picture. You have to look at everything that's going on. So zoomies, that's one of them. Obviously biting and nipping when tired. This is overstimulation. Almost like you're annoying me. Leave me alone. Biting and nipping. That can be a form of overstimulation. Pacing. Of course that's an overstimulation, right? Barking for attention. Unable to settle after walks. Whining in the crate. Following you everywhere can even be a form of overstimulation. Barking and lunging more after busy days. We had a lot going on that day, and now my dog is not great. Like, what's going on? Again, can be overstimulation. You almost want to look at three differences, okay? You have exercise, you have the physical, you have the enrichment. We always talk about, okay, there's two things, right? There's mental stimulation, and then there's the physical part of it. So mental being like the office job, physical being like the physical labor job. And we kind of stop at that. But there's another one that we always forget, and it's the regulation, right? Having our dog regulated. This is important. What could be the difference with a human, let's say, right? So going to the gym, obviously, that's physical exercise, right? Enrichment. Enrichment could be many things, right? Especially for us. Enrichment could be learning a new language. That's enrichment, is it not? It doesn't have to be something physical, like a puzzle toy, so to speak, right? But let's get into that. A puzzle, right? That could take a lot of mental stimulation, especially those hard ones. Let me tell you, there's some puzzles, forget it, I can't even do it. There's a lot, right? That's all enrichment. But then you have regulation. It's nervous system recovery. All right? What is that? How do we do that? Well, we sleep, right? I guess that's probably one way we regulate. But let's be honest, we have these moments. Let me give you an example, because I used to smoke. I don't anymore, but let me give you an idea. Oh man, I'm super stressed. I need to go out. I'll be back. I need to have a smoke, right? In that moment, I feel like the cigarette is going to recover my nervous system, even though that's an illusion, but I won't get into that. I'm not debating, tobacco products, but the point is it's about nervous system recovery. So what's a healthier version compared to having a cigarette, right? It would be something like maybe meditation. And there's many forms of meditation, right? Let's just stick with something simple. Sitting in a room, closing your eyes, and listening to waves of music. That could be a nice form of system recovery, regulation. And then let's take it even a step further. Maybe some of the people really work on that meditation. Maybe it's someone who's just literally in a room with no noise, no nothing. And even if there is noise, they don't care, right? They're relaxed, they're calm. That is nervous system regulation. Dogs need that too. You can't tell me, at least from a positive standpoint, someone who is science-based, who says the dog needs mental stimulation, the dog needs that. You can't tell me the dog needs mental stimulation and not system recovery. And if you think system recovery and mental stimulation are the same things, I'm sorry, I don't. I think it's very different. So we need to make sure that we are covering those three angles when it comes to their behavior. I think this is very, very important. So remember, exercise is body outlet, enrichment is brain outlet, and regulation is nervous system recovery. Most of us do the first two. Very few teach their dog the third. And that's something that I think we need to get better at. So I want you to use a simple formula and try this at home with your dogs. Move, think, rest. The 3-step policy you're going to try to do. Move, think, rest. An example would be we let our dog walk and sniff for 20 minutes. Short training game, 5 minutes of maybe a boundary or a sit stays, whatever you want. And then active rest, 5 to 10 minutes of doing nothing. This ends up becoming a system. And it's not just chaos, right? It truly becomes a system. I deal with many things, but reactivity is one of the big ones. So this topic, I feel, is really great about what I'm talking about for anyone who has a reactive dog. Some reactive dogs, we notice, will get worse when overstimulated. In previous episodes, I've talked about a cup, that you almost want to visualize that nervous system as like a cup. And every time the dog does something, that cup gets a little bit more full. Okay? When you have an explosion of a reaction, understand that the cup is overfilled now. Let's just say your dog went to daycare. Awesome. Then had a busy walk, lots of people back and forth. Let's say you live downtown or in the plateau. Then you had visitors over. Okay? So everything's happening. There has not been a lot of rest. You may notice that throughout the rest of the day or even the next day, your dog has less ability to handle those triggers. Now all of a sudden you get a call from the daycare and they say, yeah, I don't know what's going on with Fido or whatever, but he reacted or he did this. So overstimulation and not being able to handle the triggers are all kind of part of that nervous system. Just because even if that day went well, if it was a busy day, then understand that means there was no active rest. So that means that we're not able to empty that cup. That cup stays exactly the same. And then the next day it builds. Maybe a little came out, but not much, right? In closing, your dog does need exercise, 100%. Your dog does need enrichment, 100%. But your dog also needs recovery. If every uncomfortable moment turns into more stimulation, your dog never learns how to come back down. And so that's what keeps them always here. And so it's important to work on that nervous system and to bring them back down. More is not always better. Better is, well, better. Okay? So again, remember, you can't always out-exercise a dog who has never learned how to settle. Sometimes more stimulation creates more chaos. Exercise is important, but recovery is training too, not just the exercise. A tired dog is not always a regulated dog. Most owners train body and entertain the brain, but they forget the nervous system. They forget that active rest. Move, think, rest. That's the rhythm you want to follow. Move, think, rest. That's going to be my new line. More is not always better. Better is better. All right? Let's close on that. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. It would mean the world to me if I got some fan mail from the podcast. You should see a link when you go into our Buzzsprout where you can leave us some fan mail. We want to hear about all these, I think it was like 80 countries or 80 countries plus that are listening to the podcast. So please, I would love to hear from some of you. I know I've heard from a couple from Australia, the US. I'd love to hear from people again out there. Keeps me motivated to do these podcasts. All right. Thank you so much and enjoy. Bye.